All right, it looks like we have most everybody here. So for today, James is going to go through some questions that have been asked over the last couple weeks and some changes that we have made to documentation. He'll finish up hopefully going through the treatment episode document, and then Denise, some questions for the vendors that we'll get to at the very end. So James, if you want to go ahead and share your screen and take it away.
Sure. Morning, everyone. So we will go ahead and get started and sure. All right. Hopefully everyone can see my PowerPoint with my agenda here. Let's see. Shelby, can you see it?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. Okay,
Thanks.
great. So this is, as I said, the agenda. We're just gonna, as Shelby said, go through any questions that came up during or after the last call. Some additions to the FAQ, a question that came up about issues with the decimal point in codes, and should be a simple answer for that. A little bit of a longer chat about performance outcome measures, because that was kind of a big question that came up last time, and hopefully we can get you a good explanation on that. And then, as Shelby said, we're going to jump back into the treatment episode guide. I'll go ahead and ask right now if you have questions that have come up since the last meeting, or something that came up in the last meeting that hasn't been answered, and you want to throw those in the chat somewhere around here. If I can, I'll get to them as I can. Otherwise, we'll try to get back to you on them. So first, and I think most importantly, well, actually, before I even get to the thing I was going to say. So first, question from last time was, does the system allow attributes within element tags, or do they need to be displayed as child elements? So the simple answer is you can't put attributes within element tags like this. So you can't have within the provider treatment episode tag more information, like saying the source record identifier is 123. It has to be the beginning tag, then each data element, then the end tag. So that's how that works. So that's a pretty straightforward answer, I hope. That's not what I wanted to do. Sorry. There we go. So the big change, and I know this generated a ton of questions last time, and hopefully this answer should put everyone's mind at ease. We are in the process of developing a modification to the data warehouse to allow multiple concurrent admissions within a treatment episode. This was something that created quite a bit of concern among the providers. We understand what the needs are, and we're making the change right now. It's in development to allow multiple admissions within a treatment episode. So I've highlighted sort of the important part here, which is the first admission is still an initial admission. So even if there are two initial admissions, even if someone's being admitted, even if you want to do two concurrent admissions where they're coming in, you have to call one of them the initial, and that comes from a requirement that that stems from how the data has to be reported to TEDS and SAMHSA. But you can have as many transfer admissions as you want, and the requirement had been all open admissions must be discharged before a new transfer admission can be created, and that's been struck through. And the new requirement is all open admissions must be discharged before the treatment episode can be closed. So the definition of that, and that is in the treatment episode guide, but the definition of closed is when the closed date is populated. So if you submit a treatment episode and it has 4 open admissions in it, that's fine, as long as the closed date is blank. If you update the closed date of the treatment episode to a non-blank value, then then all admissions within the treatment episode must be closed. So hopefully that addresses the concerns that came up. I know there's been, like I said, a lot of concern about it, and it's understandable. And hopefully that's addressed it. Um, so going through more questions from last time, can we have one admission pointing to more than one treatment episode? No, you can only have any admission. An admission is a subentity of the treatment episode, and you can't share admissions among treatment episodes. Can the first contact date be the same as the admission date? Yes. Why is there a source record identifier on discharge if there's only one discharge possible for an admission? This was kind of a deep dive technical question, and generally source record identifiers are only necessary if you're going to have multiple entities. And if we go back to the diagram and we look at admission, performance outcome measure needs a source record identifier because there can be multiple admissions within a source multiple performance outcome measures within an admission, and the system needs that source record identifier to indicate which is which. Same with functional assessments. But you can only have one discharge within the admission. So the source record identifier is not necessary. And the short answer is it was there just to be flexible. So if an EHR has its own identifier, the EHR that's submitting to the data warehouse, this is where this would go. And if it's extra work to create a source record identifier for the discharge, you can use the admission source record identifier there and it won't hurt anything. Next question, does the discharge record need to have the only admissions, does the discharge record need to have the only have the admission source record sent or resend the entire matching admission record? So the question here is has to do with sending partial data for updates. So if we have to go back here, if we are sending a discharge, do we have to send all the information up here, or can we just send the discharge data? The answer is you only have to send the discharge data, but you also have to send any sort of source record identifiers up the chain to indicate where the discharge data belongs. And I did this sort of XML skeleton, if you will, to show how that would work. So within the XML for the treatment episode data set, we have a list of treatment episodes. Within that, here's the detail for a particular treatment episode. And that treatment episode is source record identifier 789. Within treatment episode 789, we have an admissions block. Within the admissions block, we have an admission, and that is admission number 123. Within that admission 123, we have a discharge, and here's where all of the details of the discharge will go. And don't worry, this is all coming to you in an FAQ. This is just me sort of walking through it. So you don't need to madly write all this down. All of this information will be coming to you, but I wanted to sort of walk everyone through it and kind of try to get clearer and more detailed answers to some of the questions that came up last time. So what we've done here is, here are the details for a discharge, and you see the note here, and all required elements for creating a discharge. Obviously, it's more than just discharge date, but this is an example of how we already have a treatment episode 789 with an admission 123. We're sending a discharge for it, and this block is all of the discharge data. The rest of it is just identifying where that discharge goes. Do we need a performance outcome measure with every admission and every discharge? Yes. So at least one POM for each admission and exactly one POM for each discharge. So you can have multiple performance outcome measures associated with an admission, and you need exactly one for the discharge. What are the valid age ranges and scores for each type of functional assessment? So this was a question that came up. We've actually adjusted the vocabulary document to reflect this. So if you look at the vocabulary document, there's a small modification here under functional assessment type. And I'll go ahead and actually read this. Additional properties for these types appear in this table, and a blank indicates no restriction. So what this means is we now have minimum scores, maximum scores, and minimum and maximum ages for each functional assessment type, and that is in the vocabulary document, or the data codes document. So for example, in daily living activities 20, the minimum score is 1.0, the maximum is 7.0. Anything outside those ranges will cause an error. The minimum age is 18, there is no maximum age. And so for child and adolescent functional assessment scale, the minimum score is 0, maximum is 240. But this does have a maximum age of 19 and a minimum age of 5. And obviously there's no constraints on incomplete or no assessment. So that's where that information lives. How do you set up a provider to submit treatment episodes in a particular area? This is actually something we've modified, and the changes for this are under development. So for most of this is the way it had been, but we have made a change. So I'll preface this and sort of close it out as well by saying changes to how providers are set up. Those changes would be done by Mississippi DMH. So if you need a change or need to find out your status, you would need to contact them. So for a provider to create a treatment episode with an admission for mental health or substance use disorder, the admission must be associated to a provider site that has a provider site identifier with the correct identifier type. So let's hop back to the diagrams real quick. There we go. And if we go up to provider, you can see providers are associated with sites, sites are associated with identifiers. And the provider site identifier has a type code and an identifier. And the type code would be IBHS number for substance abuse or IBHS number for mental health. You need to have a site with the correct kind of identifier to be able to submit a treatment episode with that sort of admission. And I've kind of explained that in this paragraph, and I hope that makes sense. The exception here is mental health admissions where the treatment setting is IDD, so IDD outpatient or IDD residential. There's no requirement for the provider site to have that provider site identifier because those sites wouldn't have IBHS numbers. And as I said, sort of at the beginning, if you need to update information, please contact DMH. So then going back to our agenda here, we've talked about the FAQ additions. Oh, codes as strings. So let's get back to here. So this was something that came up was, the numbers 2700.10 and 2700.1 are the same number. I mean, and if you've ever done this in Excel, you know exactly what's happening. You know, you put in 2700.10 and it says, no, that's 2700.1. Why are you putting extra zeros in there? The short answer is the code fields in the data warehouse are strings. They should be thought of as strings that happen to usually look like numbers, but they're strings. And so the short answer is 2700.10 isn't a number, it's a name that happens to look like a number. So those fields should be set up as character string fields. Those columns should be characters in the database. And sort of to drive that point home, what I wanted to show you is service procedure. Which we haven't gotten to yet, but I just wanted to show you these codes. We actually have some codes that have non-numeric characters in there. So If it didn't break before that, it would break with this, using a decimal for this value. So that column to store the code must be a character string. Otherwise, you'll run into a lot of problems like the two I just described. I did see a couple of things come in the chat. Let me see if I can, there we go. See what's come in. So the question was, for the functional assessment scores 1.0 through 1.99 acceptable, or is it just 1.0, 2.0? Not sure, gonna have to find out. Under the answer example of sending a discharge, can the submission be sent as show, or must there be a parent client data set, SRI, in the transmission for the discharge? In other words, is the episode SRI standalone? If I'm understanding your question correctly, and I hope that I am, and correct me if I'm not. If you have, let's see, so let's look at the treatment episode, and I should be able to answer that question. So here's treatment episode. At the beginning, we have, so to answer your question, the treatment episode has a provider source record identifier and a client source record identifier. In order to submit a treatment episode, you would need to have already had the provider and the client in the treatment episode entered into the data warehouse. And there are two ways this can happen. One is if in a previous submission to the data warehouse, you already had created that, well, obviously your provider record would already have been created. So for the client record, in a previous submission, if you'd already created that client record with the correct source record identifier, you could just reference that source record identifier. Or if you sent the client and treatment episode XMLs to the data warehouse in one bunch of files, the data warehouse would first process client and then process treatment episode, just to make sure that the files were processed in the correct order, and you wouldn't run into this problem. So if you have further questions than that, or that didn't answer your question, then feel free to throw something in the chat. And oh, thank you, CG. CG's following up on the question for the assessment scores. So the last thing I wanted to jump into before we get back to the treatment episode guide is performance outcome measure. And this I'm going to kind of give you a high level on, and the document will be coming out, but it's a question that's come up a couple of times, and hopefully this explains it in a little more detail. So the question was, where does the performance outcome measure go? Is the schema definition accurate? And sort of general questions about how performance outcome measures are associated. So what I tried to do in this document was show the places it could be and how that gets recorded. So in this example, we have a treatment episode, and the 1, 2, 3, ABC, XYZ, and DEF would be the source record identifiers here. So treatment episode 1, 2, 3 is associated directly with a performance outcome measure 901. Typically, in what I've seen, performance outcome measures are associated with admissions and discharges. If there's a performance outcome measure that's recorded either before an admission is recorded or outside the context of an admission, then that would be associated directly with the treatment episode. Here's a performance outcome measure that was taken within the context of an admission. And here's one that was taken within the context of a discharge, but is also associated with that next admission. And I think I'd given that example before, where a client was discharged from one level of care, came into another level of care, And since in our example, this happened on the same date that one performance outcome measure was reused. So that is sort of the layout of how that would look. And here what I've done is shown in yellow highlighter all the blocks in the XML where the performance outcome measures would live. This is not a complete treatment episode data set. This is the actual one would be a whole lot longer, but I kind of tried to lay this out as another sort of skeleton XML to show how this would work. So within the treatment episode data set, within our treatment episodes, here is our treatment episode 1, 2, 3, which relates to this. And we can see that within treatment episode 1, 2, 3, we have a performance outcome measures block, which references this performance outcome measure 901. And just to make it simple, I've just included marital status as a field in performance outcome measure. Obviously, there's a lot more structure to that, but I just wanted to do a short one as an example. So this is 901, and it's directly inside the treatment episode. Within that treatment episode, we have an admission. Within that admission ABC, we have performance outcome measure 902. And here's the block for performance outcome measures within the admission. And then within the admission, we have a discharge. Here's 903 within the discharge. And then that discharge block is terminated. The admission block is terminated. And this should be admissions. Typo, sorry. And then, oh, nope, I was right. Sorry, I didn't make a mistake there. So this is the next admission block. So this was the end of admission 1, and this is the beginning of admission 2. And here's admission 2. And here, and this is probably the most important part of the document, we have admission DEF. So that's this last one here, being related to this performance outcome measure that already exists. And here you notice we just have the source record identifier. We don't have any other information for that performance outcome measure. And the reason we're doing that is because we already have 903. We recorded the details elsewhere in the XML or potentially in a previous XML that we sent. And we're just saying, hey, we want to associate that existing performance outcome measure with a new admission. So like I said, you'll be getting this document. This document sort of explains what I just walked through, but I wanted to kind of try to make sure everyone understood more about performance outcome measures and how and where they go. The last thing I want to say about this is one of the questions was, does it matter what order the performance outcome measures are sent in? And what I would say on that is what matters is where the performance outcome measure is located within the XML. So for example, here we are within this admission block. We have this performance outcome measure. If you wanted to, so we are within that admission, you could take this performance outcome measure, delete it, and put it below the discharge. That would be fine, and that would do the same thing because we're still within this admission. If I took this performance outcome measure and moved it, let's see if we can do this, moved it here, that would cause an error because now this discharge doesn't have a performance outcome measure. I moved it outside the context of that discharge. So I'm gonna undo my changes so that I don't mess anything up. But I hope that that explains the performance outcome measure placement. And again, this does go back to the diagrams here, and you can see if we go back down to treatment episode, you can have a performance outcome measure within the treatment episode right here. And then you see this block here, it can be within the admission and it can also be within the discharge. So hopefully that explains that, and that's actually a good segue to get back to where we wrapped up last time, which was talking about the performance outcome measure section. So we'll get back to performance outcome measure. We had just sort of gone through this block, and I had spoken about how this is a subentity of treatment episode, admission, and discharge, which is what I just talked about. On the diagrams. Did see a question come in. Does it matter the order of fields within a subentity, like date of birth and then race? No. Order within a subentity does not matter. If you want to send date of birth and then race, or race then date of birth, it doesn't matter, just as long as they are within the correct, at the right level within the XML. Good question, thank you. So getting into the rules of the performance outcome measure. A performance outcome measure must have at least one diagnosis record. So if we go back to the diagram, we see in performance outcome measure, you can have multiple diagnosis records because there's that diagnoses block, and within that is diagnosis. You can have multiple, but the performance outcome measure must have at least one diagnosis. At least one used substance disorder is required if it's if the program area is substance use. And there's a note further down, but I do want to call out if this is a concerned person and not the actual, if this is a concerned person that's in treatment and not the actual person who's having the substance use issue, then that's the only circumstance in which the use substance of none is acceptable. Next is medication assisted opioid therapy code is required if substance use program. So that code is required for substance use. Mental health entity is required if it's a mental health program, if it's inside the mental health program. So if admissions program area is mental health, then mental health entity is required. And what that means is, going back here, and that's this block here. So there's a mental health entity that's required if it's mental health, and used substances is required if it's substance use. Used substance cannot have a rank without a higher rank. And again, if we go back to diagrams, and someone yell at me if this is too small to read. I'm gonna actually blow this up a bit because we're just looking at performance outcome measures. So hopefully that's helpful. So within used substances, we have a rank number. So for example, this person's primary issue is one substance and their secondary is another substance. And this rule is just saying you can't say this person has a secondary substance if you didn't say that they had a primary substance. The type code must be none if the type code with a higher rank is none. This is again within used substance, and the example here would be if the person's primary substance was, let's say, heroin, and you said their secondary substance was none, you could not have a tertiary substance of alcohol. If you have a ranked substance with none, anything lower than that rank must also be none. You can have a primary substance that's not none, and a secondary substance that's not none, and a tertiary substance that is none, but you can't go have primary and tertiary as an actual substance and then secondary as none. Hope that makes sense. A diagnosis cannot have a rank without a higher rank, and that's very similar to the used substance rule. So if you have multiple diagnoses, then you have to have consecutive ranks, first, second, third, and that's the rule that enforces that. And the financial and household section is required, and each performance outcome measure must contain a financial and household section. And you can see that that's a section, that's not a section that allows multiples. So this section is required and must exist in the performance outcome measure. The health section is required. You can see that. Here's the health section. Education and employment section and the legal section are both also required. So education is and employment is required, legal is required, health is required. And mental health, as you may recall, is required if this is a mental health, if this performance outcome measure is inside a mental health admission. A note about these business rules, these are positioned within the document at the performance outcome measure level because they are rules about sort of structural requirements within the performance outcome measure, or requirements that span more than one object within the performance outcome measure. Within each section, we have other rules that are relevant just to that section. So there's a note here on sharing performance outcome measures. That is in the document, and it kind of echoes what I was just explaining about how you can share a performance outcome measure within multiple entities. And another example would be if a client is administratively discharged, then you could reuse the performance outcome measure from the admission as the one for the discharge because you aren't able to collect a final performance outcome measure. So the fields on the performance outcome measure include the source record identifier, and I think we all know what that one is, the date on which the performance outcome measure was recorded, and we have some straightforward rules on that. It must be less than or equal to the current date, and it must be less than or equal to the discharge date if a discharge date is supplied. So you can't say the performance outcome measure was taken after a discharge date. The marital status code is the client's marital status, and it is required, and it is the marital status value set. So again, that would be back on the data set code values, marital status. And while I'm here, I just want to take a brief detour and note mental health treatment setting, and we also have, for level of care, another column here called the do not report to TEDS property. And what that indicates is if this is true, then the IBHS number is not required to submit an admission in that treatment setting. And that was what I was talking about back here. This rule does not apply for mental health admissions where the treatment setting is IDD outpatient or IDD residential. In all other treatment settings, and I'll show you there's a similar thing for substance use, but in all other mental health treatment settings, the provider would need to have an IBHS number for the site in which the client was admitted. In IDD outpatient and IDD residential, that requirement is waived. And in substance use, there is a similar thing for ASAM level of care that I can show you. And the reason that I said it's just mental health admissions for where treatment setting is IDD outpatient or residential is you'll note that none of these currently are true. So if it's substance use, there would need to be an IBHS number. If there were an ASAM level of care that did not require an IBHS number, it would be in this list with a value of true. So that was a small segue on that requirement. I just wanted to sort of call that out before we got too far away. The next section of performance outcome measure is financial and household. And these are fields related to the financial and household information for the client. And there is no source record identifier because if we look at the diagrams again, there's only one record. This is just a sub-entity of the performance outcome measure, and it is required. The primary income source code is the primary way that the client gets their income, and that's another code set in the code document. The primary payment source code indicates how the client will be paying for their treatment. The type of health insurance the client has is the health insurance code. The indigent code indicates whether or not the client is indigent. And this is another one of these codes that uses, this is another one of these code sets that uses the no yes value set, which is a shared value set. So indigent code does not have its own code set. Indigent code uses the no yes value set. That's probably worth coming back here to look at. So these are the shared vocabulary codes, and I think we talked about this last time. So we have no yes NA, and so on and so forth. And yep, I see that comment in there. Yes, we'll make sure that diagram is posted. The name of the document that I was going to is Mississippi DMH diagrams, and I'm glad that's helpful. So thank you. Next is living arrangement code, which again is another required code in the financial and household element within performance outcome measure. It is required, and it requires values from the living arrangement value set, which again is in that list of codes. And that's it for the financial and household section. The health section, again, this is a single entity. There's no performance outcome measure, and it is required. Pregnant code is the code indicating whether a female client is pregnant. The rules around this, I am pretty certain, do come from TED's reporting requirements. And the pregnant code must be NA if the client was identified male at birth, and it is required. So NA is not applicable. Recovery group attendance frequency code indicates if they are attending a recovery group, how often. If not, I'm pretty sure there's a not attending value in there. The frequency code, though, is required. So actually, let's look at that and make sure. There we go. Recovery. No, so yeah, if they're not going to any sort of recovery group, it would be no attendance. And we do have an unknown option in there as well, but that field is required. Medication-assisted opioid therapy code, whether they're using medication-assisted therapy, and that needs to be no, yes, unknown, or not applicable. So that's another one of those shared value sets. And this is, I believe, required if this is a substance use a substance use admission. Smoker status, I think that was a rule back up in here. Yep, right here. So one of the reason that rule is up here and not down in the health section is because it references another entity. So it's not referencing something directly within the health section. It's referencing the program area code of the admission. And that's why that rule is up here and not down in the section where you actually have the field. So please be aware that some rules are close to the fields, but other rules where it's a rule that spans sort of multiple areas, they may be at a higher level like that. So going down, smoker status code is optional and indicates the the client's current involvement with smoking, and again, that's an optional field, and uses the smoker status value set. Yes, okay, so the financial and household subentity says the performance outcome measure can contain 0 or 1 financial household measure, but I just said it's required. Yes, so that's a great question, and it's sort of an interesting decision that was made about how the document is structured, but let me, let's see, financial and household subentity. If you're seeing the may contain 0 or 1, that may be an older version of the document that was in there. The description now just says this contains information about the client, but doesn't have that 0 or 1 verbiage. The verbiage about whether or not the financial and household section is required is up in additional business rules, and it's here. Each performance outcome measure must contain exactly 1 financial and household section. So I hope that's helpful. If the POM in a treatment episode is updated, will the data update wherever that POM is referenced? Want to avoid potentially, that's a great question. Yes, if you have a POM in a treatment episode that is, to go back to my POM explainer here. Let's see. I'll go back here. Here we go. Yep. So if we had POM 903, which is shared between this discharge and this admission, if you send an update that updates that POM, that would be updated for both the discharge and the admission. So yes, there's only one sort of record in the database for that POM. So if you send an update, it would be updated in both places. That's a great question. The required fields are required for federal reporting from each state. Yes, thank you. So get back to where we were. So we were wrapping up with financial and household, right, or no, health. And we talked about smoker status. Into education and employment, this is pretty straightforward. And again, there's no indication here that the section is required. The requiredness of the section is up here at their performance outcome measure business rules. You have a grade level code, which is required and references the grade level set. The client's employment status, and it's also required, references the employment status data set. School attendance status code, which is required if this is a mental health program, or excuse me, if this is an admission in mental health. And it's optional otherwise. The next section is used substance, and hopefully we will be able to get through this, and then in about 5 or 6 minutes, I'm going to pass this back to Shelby, who needs to share some information about a spreadsheet on EHR status. So we'll try to get through used substance. It's not a huge section. We talked earlier about the requirements for about used substance and how you can't have a higher substance without you can't have a lower substance ranked substance without a higher ranked substance. So you can't say this person's secondary issue is methamphetamine without having a primary used substance. Used substance does have a source record identifier, and just to go back once again to the diagram, that's because we have a used substances block, and within that a used substance section, and that's so that multiple used substances can be recorded within a performance outcome measure. And this is the rule I referenced earlier. None can only be used for codependent. Sorry, I had the wrong verbiage there. It's codependent and not concerned person, but I think the points, I think the point makes sense, which is if this person is in for treatment of their own substance use issue, then you can't use the none value. But if they're in for as a codependent, then you can use the none value for a used substance. You can't have more than one used substance with the same rank. You can't have, so this is a very long way of describing this, but you can't have, you can only have one primary disorder, one secondary, and one tertiary. Type code, detailed type code, and route of administration code must be unique for ranked substances. So you can't have two used substances with the same type, route, and detailed substance type. The next one is first use age must be less than or equal to age at admission. And so if someone's age at admission was 24, then you can't, and that's calculated from the difference between date of birth and the admission date. Then if they're 24 when they come into treatment, it's going to throw you an error if they say that their first use age was 25. So additional guidance here. This is an important sentence. This entity is used to collect information about used substances. Some of those may be considered disorders, and disorders are identified by using a disorder rank number. Records without a disorder rank number will be accepted but not considered disorders. What this means is if a used substance entity is created with no rank, then that's an indication that the person is using that substance, but not in a disordered fashion. Or it doesn't rise to the level of being a disorder. Clients with only mental health problems do not need to report any used substances, but if they're being treated for co-occurring, but they may report that if they're being treated for co-occurring mental health and substance use, which makes sense, I think. So I have just a few minutes. I think this is all fairly straightforward. The source record identifier for the used substance section is, again, a source record identifier. The type code is the type of substance. The detailed type code is the detailed type of substance, and we have those codes and detailed codes in the vocabulary. And the detailed substance type needs to be a valid detailed substance type for the type code, if that makes sense. The disorder rank number, which we've spoken about at length, and there are some notes in here about how things, the allowable values for disorder rank number, and just getting back to it, it follows a logical progression. And the route of administration code indicates the usual route of administration by which the person uses this substance. The frequency of use, I think, is pretty self-explanatory, how frequently the client uses the substance, the age at which they first used it, and a couple of notes here. The disorder rank number, sorry, going back up. The detailed type code is optional. The disorder rank number, as I said, there's some guidance here, and the disorder rank must be a valid integer greater than 0. If it's unranked, just leave it blank or don't provide that. If it's ranked, it must be 1 or more. The route of administration is required if the substance is not none. Just to go back, we had none is allowable if the person is a codependent. If the substance is anything other than none, the route of administration is required. And the frequency of use is also required if the substance is not none. And the first use age is required if it's not none. And the first use age must be valid. It must be greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to 150. And that is where I'm going to have to drop off. And I will stop my share and pass it back to Shelby.
Awesome. Thank you, James. Okay. All right. So Denise sent me this spreadsheet. She would like to collect kind of the status of each EHR and the expected test date. So Denise, if you want to give some more background information, we can go through and fill this out. If you're talking, you're on mute. Oh, did you disappear? Okay, she may have dropped off. So I guess we can, let's see, she's not on mute, she's here. All right, do you want to walk through these, Denise?
Thank you, Shelby. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. What we'd like to do is call on each agency, the representative of the system for the vendors who are on the call. If your vendor's not on the call, maybe speak to your agency. We'd like to find out the 837 status, if it's in development, if it's ready for testing, or what date it would be ready for testing. The data warehouse status, is it in development? And what's the expected date to test? And if you're not going to do an interface, are you going to use WIPs? Those are kind of the two options, do the interfaces or use WIPs. So we can start with region 1. I did put the vendor on here because there's multiple vendor contacts that we had for each one of the agencies. Is anyone on here from region 1? Okay, I know Amber's on from region 2. Amber, could you speak to these questions?
Hear me? Is my microphone working?
Hey, there you are. We hear your child. That's great.
Okay, so unfortunately, I don't have an update. Our provider is based out of India, and their nation is on a 3-week lockdown right now. They're still responsive via email, but I'm not sure how this integration is being affected because of their national lockdown.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Amber.
Thank you.
Okay, is there anyone on for region 3?
This is Jim Dixon. I'm with NetSmart, not specifically with Region 3, but speaking for NetSmart, we are working on the 837 changes now, as well as the data warehouse changes. We expect to start testing in the second quarter, probably the second half of the second quarter.
Second half of the second quarter. So that would be
probably
April, May.
Well, second half would be May or June.
Okay, that's good target. That's okay. That gives us kind of an idea. So I appreciate it.
Sure.
And Jim, I think you're supporting other regions.
Yes.
Would it be that you want to go ahead and report for each one of those regions?
Yes.
Okay. If you will, just tell us which region. No, Shelby, not all of them. Go ahead and take all 4, 6, 7, 8. Okay.
Well, we're working specifically with Region 6 right now. You know, I'm working with their system, and then I guess probably Region 8 after that. I would. any of our customers, I see region 14. Yeah, I mean, basically, once we have it, it'll be ready for all of our clients who are using Essentia. And I see region 14, 8. So you've already got 6. Yeah, I believe that's it for us.
Essentials on 4,
Okay.
correct?
I don't think 4 is in his group though.
4 is in our group.
Yes.
Okay.
So 3, 4, 6, 8, and 14.
Okay. Thank you for that update.
Sure.
Do we have anyone from Region 9 on the call from BTI?
Yeah, I'm representing BTI. Can you hear me?
We can.
All right. So this would apply to each of the regions listed. The 837 is in development. It's close to being ready, except for resolving the new requirement for the NT02 record referencing the service data set in the data warehouse. Once we get some of those issues answered and resolved, we can complete that work. The data warehouse is in development. We've got the client data set and the episode nearing test availability. The services would be pending, as well as a few of the subset records in the treatment episode. But it's actively in development, and I guess I would hope to have testing ready within 60 days, at least.
For both the 837 and the data warehouse?
Yeah, because if we get the services nailed down and its relationship to the grant processing, we should be able to complete the 837 at that point.
Okay. Which regions do you support? I don't want to over.
Well, the ones you have listed are the ones that we know that I know for a fact will be using our submission. Whether any of the others are or not, I'm not
So
sure.
is Shelby overdoing it here with all of these copies? No. Because, okay. So everywhere we have BTI, we can put that in?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, Shelby, I know you're typing fast. You ready for Region 10?
I'm ready.
Okay. I saw a couple of them from Region 10. Do you guys have an update for your 837 or data warehouse?
Hey, this is Keith from Region 10. I can't speak to it right now. I'll speak with Lori Denise, probably give you an update once I talk with her. But I was kind of curious if we have any representatives from NetSmart and TIER specifically on the call.
Jim Dixon's on. He supports the Essentia. I think NetSmart's kind of broken out into the different applications.
Yeah, Jim, you're with Essentia though, but I was wondering if anybody was with TIER.
Yeah.
Vicky just commented and said she's here from TIER.
Okay, Vicky. Okay. All right, Vicky. Well, I'm sure we'll be working with you, but like I said, Denise, let me email you and I'll give you a status of our region.
Okay. Thank you, Keith.
Yep.
Do we have any support on for Region 11? I just had NetSmart, so I'm not sure which product they use. Okay, Region 12. Okay, the message in the chat says Prasad will be for Region 2. Okay, that's Region 2. Okay, I thought, Bree, are you still on the line from Region 12? Or Mike? Okay, it looks like we got 13, 14, 15. Do we have someone on for, Shelby, you're gonna have to help me, it's little writing. RIM?
Yep.
Avatar, that's another NetSmart product. Okay, do we have anyone on for TheraApp?
Okay. Maureen.
I think we had someone on for Canopy. Kayla, are you still on the line with us?
I am. I'm actually not sure. Eddie's the one that would be the one that would have the status update from NetSmart. I've been texting him throughout, so I'm waiting to hear back from him. But I'll email you guys this time I hear something. But I know we've talked about wanting to test at least the 807 by May.
Okay, Shelby, that's going to be Canopy.
This is David from NetSmart.
Oh, hey.
I'm not with REM. I'm not with the Avatar side, but I don't believe they're on the call.
Yes, I was trying to unmute my call. I'm on for backup for Jessica Matthews. She's traveling today, so I would have to talk with her to get more information.
Okay, thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
So for Canopy, we can get an update from Kayla on that. She said May for the potential testing.
For the MyVolve platform, we'll be ready to test in May, possibly the end of April. I had a question. Are you going to be able? Would you accept a file from us, or do we have to deliver to our clients and have them produce a test file for you for testing?
I'll let Shelby answer that because the way I understand it, it's the provider that will be doing the testing versus the vendor. But Shelby, is that correct?
Yeah, you can file for them to upload. Fine.
Okay. I mean, I'm looking for a general softball validation of the file, obviously.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that would be fine for
yeah,
the initial tests.
Because we would be able to test sooner if that were the case. So we may be able to get you a file here mid-April, end of April, early May. But for testing with the provider, we'll have it delivered in May.
Okay. Awesome.
That's for both Canopy and LifeCore.
So LifeCore Region 2?
Yeah, well, any of the MyVolve.
Okay. Okay, Keith, I think you're on. You or Christopher. This is going to be the DMH hospitals. There's a couple of lines down there. Do you want to give us the status of where you guys are?
Hey, Denise. We're done with the client file, so we're ready to test that one. The episode file's probably going to be sometime next week, but hopefully we'll have everything completed and in testing certainly during April.
Okay, and they don't have to do an 837, Shelby.
Right.
Because they don't get funding. Several of these don't do the 837.
Okay.
So just kind of looking at the data warehouse status. Is anyone that I didn't call on that's on the call that can provide a status?
Yeah, this is Seth with Methosoft. And yeah, the bottom line is it's the data warehouse is on schedule for the second quarter. So we'll begin development in April, probably be testing some in April, and then we'll just create a roadmap for our Mississippi clinics to know when to do the deployment.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any others that we haven't called on? Okay, Shelby, did we get a response to My Evolve?
We did.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you all. This is a very good checkpoint for us to know where we stand right now, so I can communicate where we're going. So, Shelby, that's what I needed from the spreadsheet, so thank you.
Prasad with Region 2 is on. Do you want him to give the update?
Sure.
You can go ahead, Prasad, if you're ready. You're muted if you're talking, Prasad. So it's easier. Okay, most likely begin development in early April. Okay.
Okay, and we have one more, Shelby. Sharon Harper is on for Ellisville. Not sure if the number's coming up, but she said she can't. She's muted.
Talk now, Sharon.
Hello.
There you go.
Okay.
We are actually not, I didn't notice in the column it says an in-house program, Tierra Fox Pro. We're actually doing it with a Fox Pro database currently. That'll be converted later. So it's just an in-house program that we're writing. So yeah. We're not doing the 837, and we're shooting for May or June for testing.
Okay, and this isn't directed at Sharon, but thank you for your update. For all the vendors, we would like to start testing maybe with just one client, just to make sure the process works with just one client. And then we can expand that to do multiples. I think that would be an easier test just to make sure the process works. So if that, helps your dates a little bit, if you want to move it up and say by April, you're able to do that and just send one client with the client information, treatment episode, and services, at least that would be an initial test to see, how close you are to the final. But thank you all. This was good information. I appreciate your feedback.
Yeah, awesome.
That's all I had, Shelby.
All right. Well, that is all we have. Thank you all for your time. And I hope.
One more thing, if I could. Sorry.
Go ahead, James.
I just wanted to squeeze in one last note, which was I did see the comment come in. I did have one question that I didn't get to, which was about the legal section. Like the other sections that we talked about, it doesn't say in the legal section specifically that it's required. That rule does exist at the root of the performance outcome measure under additional business rules. And I will make sure that updated documentation is sent out. And that's all I had.
Okay, the one that was just speaking, are you FEI?
Yes, this is James with FEI.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, James. I thought you had to drop off, so I didn't expect you back.
Nope, still here.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all for your time. I hope you stay safe and healthy, and we will talk to you in a couple.
Thanks,
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.